He was the man who faced Hannibal when Rome itself trembled on the edge of destruction. Yet victory can be the beginning of betrayal. Hero, savior, outcast. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and smoke. Along the North African coast, Roman warships cut through the waves, their oars pulling in perfect rhythm, their hulls groaning under the weight of thousands of legionaries. At the prow of one vessel stood a man whose life had been shaped by loss and expectation. Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus. He had been barely a boy when tragedy first claimed him, fatherless, yet bound by the colossal shadow of his adoptive grandfather, Scipio Africanus, the man who had once driven Hannibal from Italy. Now, decades later, fate had brought him to the same shore, in the same war, to finish what his family had begun. The Second Punic War had dragged on for nearly 2 decades. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian genius who had shattered Roman legions at Cannae, still roamed Italy like a phantom. Rome's Senate had decided the war must end, and it must end on Carthage's doorstep. But in Africa, Hannibal's cavalry dominated the open plains, cutting down any Roman army foolish enough to challenge him in the field. Scipio knew brute force would not be enough. His mind worked like a tactician and a gambler, striking alliances with Numidian leaders, sowing divisions in Carthaginian ranks, and slowly tearing away Hannibal's greatest weapon, his horsemen. Every decision carried risk. Every step brought him closer to the duel that history demanded. And so, as dawn broke over the sands, Scipio gazed toward the horizon where Carthage lay. The sun cast long shadows over his face, half light, half darkness. The look of a man who understood that to defeat Hannibal was not only to win a war, but to change the destiny of Rome itself. Before the final clash at Zama, before glory or ruin, there was only this moment, a calm before the greatest storm of the ancient world. Question for comments. If you were in Scipio's place, would you risk everything on one decisive battle? Or drag the war out to bleed your enemy slowly? In the year 204 BC, the war that had consumed a generation finally shifted to a new stage. After nearly 15 years of bloodshed on Italian soil, Rome had resolved to strike at the very heart of its enemy. A fleet of Roman ships crossed the Mediterranean, their sails taut with the winds of destiny, carrying with them the boldest gamble yet, an invasion of North Africa. At their head stood Publius Cornelius Scipio, a man still young, but already tempered by years of war and the burden of his family's legacy. The landing was no simple maneuver. Carthage, scarred but unbroken, still possessed immense resources, allies, and, above all, the genius of Hannibal Barca. Yet Scipio's genius lay not only in force of arms, but in diplomacy. He understood that wars were won not only on the battlefield, but in the minds and loyalties of men. His first move was to court the Numidians, masters of cavalry who for years had tipped the balance in Carthage's favor. By securing alliances with Massinissa, a Numidian prince, Scipio transformed Rome's greatest weakness, its lack of effective cavalry, into a strength that could rival Hannibal's legendary horsemen. The clash was inevitable. In 202 BC, outside a small settlement called Zama, the two greatest commanders of the age would finally meet face to face. Hannibal, recalled from Italy to defend his homeland, brought with him the scars of 2 decades of campaigning. His army was formidable. War elephants, seasoned veterans, and mercenaries gathered from across the Carthaginian Empire. Scipio, by contrast, commanded an army disciplined and eager, their confidence unshaken by past defeats, their spirits lifted by the promise of vengeance. At dawn, the two armies arrayed themselves on the dusty plain. The Carthaginian war elephants, towering beasts armored and tusked, began their thunderous charge. Dust rose in clouds, the earth itself trembling under their weight. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if Scipio's lines might crumble. But he had prepared for this very moment. His soldiers opened wide corridors in their formation, funneling the beasts harmlessly through, while javelins and trumpets scattered them into chaos. What had once been Hannibal's instrument of terror became instead a weapon turned against him, as the maddened elephants trampled his own troops. Then came the clash of infantry. Veterans of Cannae, men who had once shattered Rome's might, now faced legionaries trained in new tactics. Flexible maniples that could adapt to the battlefield with precision. The fighting was brutal, spear against shield, sword against flesh. A grind of endurance that stretched across the plain. For hours, the battle swayed in uncertainty, each side pressing, yielding, and pressing again. But Scipio's true stroke of genius lay not in the center, but on the wings. His Numidian allies, swift and relentless, swept aside Hannibal's cavalry, gaining full control of the flanks. When the moment was right, they wheeled back upon the Carthaginian rear, trapping Hannibal's army in a tightening noose. Surrounded, outmaneuvered, and with no escape, the Carthaginians broke. The plain of Zama became a graveyard of Carthage's hopes. Hannibal himself survived, but his aura of invincibility had been shattered. The man who had once stood at the very gates of Rome was now forced to plead for peace. For Rome, it was more than a victory. It was vindication, a rebirth of confidence after years of humiliation. Carthage was forced to accept crippling terms, surrender of its fleet, massive reparations, and a pledge never to wage war without Rome's approval. The Punic threat, which had once seemed poised to end Rome's story, was now reduced to a shadow of its former self. Scipio returned not merely as a general, but as a savior. The Senate bestowed upon him the title Africanus, the conqueror of Africa, forever binding his name to Rome's triumph. In that moment, standing upon the blood-soaked fields of Zama, Scipio had risen from the boy burdened by his father's absence to the man who had humbled Hannibal and secured Rome's place as master of the Mediterranean. But as history often shows, the highest triumphs cast the longest shadows. The victory at Zama would make Scipio immortal, yet it would also plant the seeds of envy, suspicion, and betrayal that would later consume him. Do you think Hannibal could have still won at Zama if he had kept control of his cavalry? Was Scipio's victory more a triumph of strategy or of alliances and diplomacy? The triumph of Zama had elevated Scipio to heights few Romans had ever known. He returned to the Eternal City not just as a victor, but as the man who had saved Rome itself. The Senate hailed him, the people adored him, and in gratitude, Rome bestowed upon him the title that would follow him through history, Africanus, No longer simply Publius Cornelius Scipio, he was now the man who had conquered Carthage and delivered security to the Republic. In the public eye, he became a living legend. His name was spoken in the same breath as Romulus and other mythical founders. He was not merely a general, he was a symbol of Rome's destiny. Yet such glory is a dangerous gift in the Republic.